Hey everybody, Jermaine, J.P.'s World of Wrestling. We're going to try this again. This is my second attempt at doing this video. Got a couple of phone calls with the first attempt, but this is my second attempt. So, we're talking about King of the Ring. It's a little bit of a different backdrop. I'm sorry I don't have my usual wrestling backdrop today, but I just got home and it's hot outside and I'm tired, and so here we go. So King of the Ring 1995. 1995 I've already kind of talked about on this channel. 95, there wasn't really a whole lot going on in the WWF in 95. You know, there was, they had Shawn Michaels and Brett, and they had Owen Hart, Razor Ramon and IRS, and they did have a stable of stars, and but it's just, the wrestling audience was changing, and people were kind of tired of cheesy occupational gimmicks, so business was slow. So, King of the Ring, they had guys like Ahmed Johnson and Goldust and Razor Ramon and Brett and Owen, Jeff Jarrett, guys like that. I think the hero of the night, though, was probably Savio Vega, because Savio, he wrestled in a match on the free-for-all, because for those of you that remember, the WWF used to have this, a half hour before the pay-per-view, they would have what was called the free-for-all, where they would usually have a single match just to kind of whet your appetite to get last-minute buyers to buy the pay-per-view. And then they would talk about the pay-per-view, and then the pay-per-view would start, but you'd have to actually go to the pay-per-view channel in order to see it. So Savio Vega won the final qualifying match on that event, and then he went on to the finals, and then the finals ended up being Mabel against Savio Vega, but Mabel, of course, ended up coming out victorious, and then we got to see King Mabel. And from that point on, for a whole year, everything was all part of the royal plan of Mabel. It was kind of cheese, I'm sorry. I know the phone's kind of moving around, but yeah, so, like I said, I watched it one time through here recently, over the past couple weeks, and it was a full tournament. It wasn't just semifinals and then the finals, like the next 2 years would be, but nevertheless, it was something. I think Diesel was there. He might have wrestled Brett. I don't know. I don't remember. Like I said, it was kind of a forgettable event because they were trying to push Mabel. And I don't think it was this event, but it was one of the 95 In Your Houses where Mabel was wrestling Diesel. And he sat down really hard on Diesel's back, and you could audibly hear Diesel getting angry and screaming at Mabel. Because Mabel was notorious for not being careful, and he was hurting guys. I don't think it was his fault. I don't think he meant to, but it's just, he was really big. He was like a 500-pound guy, and he was like accidentally like putting all of his weight down on guys and hurting them. And so Mabel was actually pretty agile for a 500-pound human being. So, but yeah, Mabel won. We got to see King Mabel, and everything was all part of the royal plan of Mabel. Sorry, I don't know what that motorboat thing there was for, but anyway. Yeah, King of the Ring 1995. And then the next year we got to see King of the Ring 1996, and I'll just kind of move right into that. Jake the Snake Roberts, Stone Cold Steve Austin. There's a lot of guys during the 96 part of that. And that's actually where the phrase Austin 316 was born. Now, in 96, the WWF was sort of slowly creeping towards a new era. They were sort of inching their way past the new generation, and they were starting to see the writing on the wall and realizing they needed to change. So there was this guy named Stone Cold Steve Austin that was on the rise. Now, I've often said on this channel I was not a big fan of his, but I kind of was at first. I liked him at first, but this was kind of, I think, what changed my mind about him. And it's funny, this is kind of when everybody else jumped on the Stone Cold bandwagon, but for me, it was kind of when I'm like, yeah, I don't really like that. But nevertheless, 96, it wasn't a full tournament. It was the semifinals and then the finals. And Jake the Snake Roberts wrestled Vader. First off of the night, Vader ended up like really kind of hurting him, or at least Jake sold that he was hurt. And then the finals were Jake the Snake Roberts and Steve Austin, Stone Cold. And they actually did a really good job making it seem like Jake could actually pull it off. Because at the time he was considered old for a professional wrestler. Even though nowadays guys wrestle like in their 50s and 60s. Heck, I think Greg Valentine is still wrestling. But nevertheless, yeah, so Austin wins the King of the Ring, goes up to the coronation ceremony, talks about how because Jake Roberts was a born-again Christian at the time, and Austin kind of mocked his religion, mocked his faith, and said, you talk about your John 3:16, well, Austin 3:16 said, and I just whipped your, and that's kind of where Austin 3:16 was born. And the next night, all around the arena, you saw Austin 3:16 signs, and I guess that kind of launched WWF into a new era, and they made a lot of money. I have to admit that they did make a lot of money during that time. But in '95 and '96, they were still kind of struggling to compete with the WCW. So, yeah. So, '96 and '95 were both King of the Rings. They both had King of the Rings. Both at some point, the King of the Rings stopped, and Vince McMahon just didn't like the tournament format, so he stopped doing them. But up until I think 2001, they were still having them. I think 2001 was the last year. Then after that, they would have King of the Ring tournaments every now and again, but it wasn't like for a pay-per-view. It was just, they would have tournament matches on Raw, and then eventually on Raw, they would have the finals, in which one year I think it was Booker T that won, and then it was William Regal that won. But anyway, 95 and 96, Mabel and Stone Cold Steve Austin. So those were your next two King of the Ring champions. And so those were interesting years in the wrestling world, because at this time, by the time King of the Ring 1996 was there, the NWO hadn't quite been born yet. It had been conceived, because I think Scott Hall had appeared on Nitro. Kevin Nash had appeared on Nitro 2 weeks later, and then they had not yet revealed their third man. Hulk Hogan had not yet joined the NWO by this time. So the war was on between WWF and WCW. And the King of the Ring was just another thing that WWF did that eventually they stopped. But I think they're kind of bringing it back now. So we'll see where that goes. So anyway, 1995 and 1996, King of the Ring. And I'm sorry I didn't talk more about 96. But to be honest, I wasn't, I don't really remember much. I think, the Body Donnas were in a tag match against the Smoking Guns in a tag title match, I think, in 96. And I think Diesel defended the belt, I think probably against Brett. And I think it might have been where Brett won, and then Diesel turned into a bad guy, or right before he left. I don't know. That might be totally wrong. In fact, it probably is. So, anyway, I guess, I just watched it a couple weeks ago, but I've been so busy, it just right out my head. So anyway, that's going to do it for this video. I'm sorry it's not, more exciting, and I'm still working on the action figure video. I might just do some action figure videos just to kind of keep the appetite wet, that maybe don't really meet, they're just matches. But, we'll see what happens, we'll see where it goes. I just landed a new job today, so we'll see where that goes. I know it seems like I keep bouncing from job to job. I just have had a string of bad luck in that area. So, but anyway, I landed a new job today. I don't know when I start, but hopefully that will be something that will turn out well. But in the meantime, that's going to do it for this video. If you're new, feel free to like and subscribe. And for all you new subscribers, thank you so much. And I hope to bring you a lot more content here in the near future. And I will see you next time.